Young child missing in the forest until a wandering German shepherd emerged. What occurred afterward rescued his existence. A German shepherd materialized through the timber. When Finley observed what was guiding him through the untamed terrain, he was petrified. This 5-year-old youngster had been missing for countless hours in thick woodland where daylight scarcely penetrated the foliage overhead. The rustling became more intense. Limbs cracked and Finley pushed his spine against a colossal oak, convinced a feral creature was pursuing him. Then she surfaced, a homeless canine with tangled coat and vigilant gaze. What she executed afterward was so astonishing it would rescue his existence and trouble him for generations. Before viewing, don't neglect to approve, distribute and follow, so you never overlook another heart-clutching tale like this particular one. Pinewood Grove Mobile Home Community rested on the boundary of untamed land, not the picturesque variety where households hiked designated pathways and captured photographs. The authentic variety where timber grew so compact that roots vanished after 50 yards, where the woodland floor was a labyrinth of toppled logs and spiky vegetation, where you could traverse in a linear direction for countless hours and never observe heavens. The youngsters who resided there understood certain regulations. Remain within view of the open area, don't traverse the stream, return before nightfall. Elementary regulations that typically maintained them secure during their perpetual fortress-constructing expeditions. Finley Cordovan was 5, perhaps 6, diminutive for his years, with scraped knees constantly decorated with adhesive bandages and a frantic necessity to maintain pace with his elder sibling, Dashiell, and the remaining youngsters. That evening, Dashiell and 3 companions had declared they were venturing deeper to construct a fresh fortress. Finley pleaded to accompany them. "You're too sluggish," Dashiell stated, not glancing backward. "I won't be, I swear. Mother said I don't have to monitor you every moment." The elder youngsters moved rapidly, chuckling and pushing each other, transporting branches and cord. Finley pursued regardless, his diminutive limbs pumping to equal their pace. Through the recognizable portion of the timber they proceeded, beyond the collapsed birch that indicated the perimeter, beyond the stream. Finley dropped behind. He could detect them forward, their voices rebounding between timber. Then he couldn't detect them whatsoever. He halted, inhaling vigorously, surveying around. Everything appeared identical. Brown bark, emerald foliage, darkness. He rotated in a sphere. Which direction had he arrived from? Where was the stream? Terror expanded in his torso like something animated and piercing. "Dashiell," his voice fractured. "Dashiell, pause." Only quietness responded, not even foul, just the murmur of breeze through limbs high overhead. He commenced walking, then walking more rapidly, then sprinting, limbs slapping his countenance, roots snatching his ankles. He didn't realize he was venturing deeper. He didn't realize that every frantic stride carried him farther from anything recognizable, closer to the gorge, where liquid rushed over stones 50 feet underneath. After an interval, Finley descended and wept. After 2 intervals, he'd ceased weeping and commenced trembling. His garment was ripped. Crimson dried on his limbs from thorns. The darkness grew lengthier, murkier. He drew his knees to his torso and attempted to recall what his mother resembled. Attempted to recall if anyone had actually witnessed him depart. That's when he detected it, something traveling through the vegetation, something massive. His respiration ceased. He detected tales about bears, about coyotes, about entities that inhabited these timbers. The rustling intensified, limbs shattering with intention. Something was approaching directly toward him. Finley compressed against the oak timber, attempting to render himself tinier. His pulse hammered so vigorously he thought his ribs might fracture. Whatever it was proximate now, 10 feet, 5 feet. Then she stepped into visibility. A German shepherd, substantial with a dense coat matted with burrs and soil. She was homeless, no neckband, no identification, traveling with the exhaustion of a creature that endured solitary. Her ears were elevated, attentive, her murky gaze secured on Finley with a concentration that made him immobilize. They gazed at each other, youngster and canine, both solitary in the untamed land. Finley had been instructed to dread unfamiliar canines, but this particular one didn't snarl or expose her fangs. She advanced a stride closer, inhaled the atmosphere, then produced a gentle sound. Not entirely a whimper, not entirely a bark, something tender. "Pleasant canine," Finley murmured, though his voice trembled. The canine traveled closer, proximate enough that Finley could have contacted her. She encircled him once gradually, then walked 5 strides away and halted. She rotated her skull and glanced directly at him, paused. When he didn't travel, she advanced another few strides, halted again, glanced backward. Finley didn't comprehend initially. The canine repeated the sequence. Walk, halt, glance backward, pause. Her physical language was intentional, deliberate. She desired him to pursue. "I don't realize where to proceed," Finley stated to the canine, to himself, to nobody. The shepherd walked backward to him. This occasion she encircled closer, her shoulder tenderly brushing his limb, then travelled to the root again, halted, glanced backward. Those murky gaze held something Finlay couldn't identify. Not entirely pleading, more like conviction, like she realized something he didn't. Something nobody observed at the period was that Finlay had been positioned less than 50 yards from a precipitous gorge. One incorrect rotation in his terror, one sightless sprint through the timber, and he would have descended over the boundary into rushing liquid and stones underneath. The canine hadn't arrived from that direction. Finlay elevated on trembling limbs. The canine's appendage traveled slightly, not oscillating, just acknowledging. She commenced walking. Finlay pursued. For the subsequent 40 minutes, they traveled through woodlands so compact that dusk had already established between the trunks. The canine never hastened. She sustained a tempo Finlay could equal, halting whenever he stumbled, pausing when he required to capture his respiration. When he hesitated at a particularly dense patch of thorns, she located another route around and demonstrated him. When he stumbled over a root and descended, scraping his palms, she returned to him, compressed her nose against his cheek in something resembling comfort, then resumed the route. Finlay observed her physical language, with the concentration only dread could intensify. The manner she traveled with absolute conviction, selecting between identical appearing routes without hesitation, the manner she seemed to realize which direction to proceed when Finlay couldn't observe more than 10 feet forward. They weren't retracing Finlay's frantic route. If they had been, he would have recognized something, a timber, a stone, anything, but everything appeared unfamiliar. The canine was transporting him somewhere else, somewhere particular. "Where are we proceeding?" Finlay inquired once. The canine's ears pivoted backward toward his voice, but she didn't halt. The woodland commenced to diminish. Finlay could observe patches of heavens between limbs. The canine's tempo escalated slightly, her physical language more assured. Then abruptly there was illumination forward. Authentic illumination, not filtered through foliage, open territory. They surfaced onto a thoroughfare, not just any thoroughfare. Finlay recognized it instantly. Route 17, the dual-lane highway that curved beyond Pinewood Grove approximately 2 miles from residence. He knew this thoroughfare. He knew the direction residence from here. The canine halted at the boundary of the pavement. Finlay stumbled forward, his limbs scarcely supporting him. He glanced one direction, then the alternative, obtaining his orientation. The mobile home community was leftward, then rightward at the junction. He knew this. He could accomplish it. He rotated to the canine. She rested at the woodland's boundary, observing him with those identical murky, knowing gaze. Something in Finlay's torso fractured open. "Gratitude," he murmured. The canine elevated for one instant. She stepped closer, proximate enough that Finlay could bury his diminutive, filthy hands in her tangled coat. She was warm and substantial and authentic. Then she stepped backward. Her appendage traveled once, and she rotated and dissolved backward into the timber like darkness into darkness. "Pause," Finlay summoned, but she was already vanished. He stood solitary on the vacant thoroughfare as the initial celestial bodies emerged overhead. He walked residence. His limbs ached, his abrasions strung, but he walked the 2 miles backward to Pinewood Grove as obscurity descended completely. When he ultimately observed the recognizable cluster of mobile homes, relief flooded through him so powerfully he nearly regurgitated. Nobody was seeking him. Dashel and the remaining youngsters had presumed Finlay preceded residents countless hours earlier when he couldn't maintain pace. The resident who was supposed to be supervising thought Finlay was with Dashel. His mother was laboring a delayed shift. Nobody had observed he was absent. Nobody had fretted. Nobody had investigated. Finlay slipped into the mobile home, cleansed himself up in the lavatory, and proceeded to slumber. He never informed anyone what occurred that day. Who would have trusted him? Who would have minded? Only generations afterward, as an adult with offspring of his own, did Finlay genuinely comprehend what had occurred in those timbers. He investigated German shepherds and their intellect, their problem-resolving capabilities. He discovered about their sense of orientation, their ability to navigate complicated terrain. But more than that, he comprehended something deeper. That canine hadn't stumbled upon him by chance. She had located him intentionally, and she hadn't just consoled him. She had actively guided him through miles of untamed land, avoiding the gorge he didn't realize existed, selecting a safer route than the one he'd advanced in, transporting him to a thoroughfare where he could locate his direction residence. She had rendered decisions, resolved problems, protected him. She had been his protector when no human was. The recollection serves Finlay now as both wonder and injury. Wonder because, against impossible circumstances, assistance arrived when he required it most. Injury because that assistance arrived from a homeless canine who demonstrated more attention to his security than any adult accountable for him that day. He had endured a youth where offspring had to depend on fortune, instinct, and sometimes the compassion of roaming creatures. Now, as a father, Finley never permits his own offspring out of his vision in unfamiliar locations. He instructed them about the timbers, about peril, about requesting assistance. But he also instructed them something else, something that homeless German shepherd instructed him in the diminishing illumination of that terrifying evening. Sometimes protector celestial beings arrive with tangled coat and knowing gaze. Sometimes salvation doesn't resemble what we anticipate it to. And sometimes the boundary between existence and demise in the untamed land is protected not by human wisdom, but by the inexplicable compassion of a creature who selected to care when nobody else executed. If this tale affected you and revealed your vision to the unexpected manners, assistance can arrive when we require it most. Don't neglect to approve this footage, remark your thoughts, and follow for more powerful tales that remind us how delicate our security can be. Distribute it with companions and relatives, because sometimes the distinction between missing and located is nothing more than a stranger who refuses to depart.